To make our 3D models look good, a well-tuned final render is essential. So in this video, we'll learn how to create the lighting and set up a scene in Blender to achieve a clean and professional presentation. We'll go through how to create, configure, and position lights to highlight the shape and quality of our model. If you don't have a model ready, you can download this rubber duck for free from my Gumroad page. The link is in the description. And with that, let's get started. Before we start rendering, there are some important technical aspects of Blender that we have to keep in mind. The first thing is that Blender has two rendering engines. The first one is Eevee, which is a real-time engine and is very fast and can achieve very good quality. But for our course, we are going to be working with Cycles, which despite being slower is much more powerful. And for the rendering to have a good performance, we have to select here in Device, GPU, Compute. This way, the performance will be much faster because we will be using our GPU. To make sure that our graphics card is being used, we can come here to the Preferences, and here in System, we can make sure that it's set. In my case, I have an NVIDIA 1080 Ti, which is CUDA compliant. So I have both the card and the processor active for rendering. In case you don't have a dedicated graphics card, you can use CPU, but it's going to be much slower process. I recommend that you use the CUDA method. I'm going to close my preferences, and here we also have the options for displaying in the viewport. In the samples, I'm going to reduce the amount. This is a lot, so I'm going to leave it at 50. And I'm also going to activate the denoise. What the denoise does is to apply some algorithms to eliminate the noise of the scene, and in this way, the rendering will be much faster. And here in the denoiser, I'm going to select Open Image Denoise, which is the most viable for static objects, like the ones we are going to be creating. So I'm going to go through here in Material Mode, and we'll adjust these technical parameters. And now, I'm going to remove the cube and reappear my duck. You can do it with this duck, or use your own model. Here, I like to prepare my interface for rendering. So I like to separate three panels here. In the first one, I'm going to put the 3D view with the camera perspective, and I'm going to press 0 so that it aligns to the camera view. And I'm going to hide the gizmo and overlays. I'm also going to hide the left panel with the T key, and I'm going to make sure I frame this part of the camera well in the 3D panel. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, something like this. And here, I'm going to put it in render view. And on this side here, I like to put the shader editor, where we have the materials. If we select our object, this panel is displayed where the materials are in a tree of nodes, where I can access much more detailed information about the properties of these materials. The first thing we have to keep in mind is that we are going to be rendering the lights of our scene, and for that to work in a realistic way, the ideal is that the object that we are going to render has an approximate scale to reality. If we check here in this right panel, we can see that this model in this case is 4.8 meters tall, which is extremely unrealistic. So the first thing I'm going to do is to scale it all, so that it has a measurement much more in line with reality. Here, for example, it is 32 centimeters, which is a much more coherent value. So I'm going to adjust the 3D view here a little bit to adjust the camera angle. So I'm going to come here to Perspective. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a camera angle that I like for this model. And I'm going to zoom in. And when I'm happy with the camera angle, I'm going to press Ctrl-Alt-0. And that way, the camera is framed to the angle that we had in the 3D view. Here I can continue adjusting it. I can move the camera into Z-axis. Here I am going to scale it also a little bit and move it away, trying to get my model well framed. Something more or less like this. As this model has such a small scale, I press Shift to make the transformation much smoother. I can control the transformations better. So ready, here I have the first thing, which is the camera angle, and let's turn on the render view. And that's what we have. Here in our scene, we have this light, which is the default light in the Blender scene. But I want to create the lights from scratch so you can see how the process works. So I'm going to delete this one, and as you can still see the duck. That means that there are still lights in this scene. The light that we have left is the actual material of the world. To check that, can come here to the shader editor and select world. And here we have the material. It says here that this background has a gray color and a strength of 1, so it works like a gray light affecting from all angles. And since I want to completely control the lighting in my scene, I'm going to reduce this to a very low value. It can be 0.1 so that it has a little bit of influence and I can still perceive the silhouette, but that it doesn't have as such an influence on the lighting result. And for this to be a little faster and to be able to visualize well what I have in the camera, I will press Ctrl B, which is the frame tool, and I will select the entire camera. So in this way, I will have rendered only what is inside the camera. That was the first step. And now let's start creating the lighting. First of all, I suggest you put the cursor in the center of the world, cursor to world origin, and put the pivot point in the 3D cursor. Then here, I can create a light, and as it will be in the 3D cursor when doing transformations, the light will always be pointing to our object. I'm going to move it up here on the Z-axis, and here I would have the first light of my scene. There you can see that no matter which way I rotate this light, it's always going to be pointing towards my model. Well, let's adjust the properties of the light a little bit. For that, we can come to this tab, and the first thing is that I want the silhouette to be a disk. A disk is a little circle, which I think works a little bit better for this kind of minimalistic object. Now I'm going to add a surface to render this model. So I'm going to create a plane. And here I have two options. The first one is to simply scale this plane until it goes out of camera, so that you see the object on the surface, and the light is lost a little bit towards the background. And the other option is to rotate this square a little bit until it is aligned with the camera. I can scale it a little bit too. In the back part, I extrude it upwards, creating a kind of L. And to this edge, I'm going to create a bevel with many segments, like this. In this way, I'm going to get a little bit of light on the background as well. Both ways are equally valid, so I recommend that you do the exploration on your own. In this case, we're going to try this method. And I'm also going to set Shade Smooth. That's it then. Now let's create the lighting. For lighting, we have to keep in mind that the angle and intensity of the light greatly influence the perception of the volumes of my model. So we have to try to place the lights in such a way that they highlight the volumes of our model. For example, in this case, I think we can rotate the light a little bit so that it is slightly diagonal and the volume of this area is perceived a little bit better. If I put it back the way it was from above, it looks very flat. So something like this I think works better. And from here, we can adjust the intensity and the size. The smaller the size, the harder the shadow is going to be. As you can see down here, I'm reducing the size, and the shadow becomes more contrasted. And if I increase it, the shadow becomes softer. So it's up to you to play with this a little bit. When I use lights that have very little size, that the shadow is very hard, the details will look a little bit sharper. In this case, we have a very soft object, so I'm not interested in putting such hard shadows on it. And here we are also going to adjust the intensity of the illumination, and that scene is starting to look very good. Let's find a point that we like. Let's try 40, for example. I'm going to rotate this light a little bit more. That's it. And I'm going to duplicate this light to put another one on the side and have a little bit of influence from this side. I'm going to rotate it a little bit more so that the details of the contours are mostly illuminated. I'm going to rotate it a little bit more. And we can also play with the colors of the light. For example, here, I can try putting a slightly bluish tone, something like that. And I'm going to reduce the intensity a little bit. I'm going to put 20. And I'm going to put a third light coming from the other side. And for an interesting color contrast, I'm going to put a warmer tone on this. And I'm going to increase the intensity a touch. And that's it. Here we can also play around a little bit with putting materials on this surface. We can try a color similar to the ducks. Or look for the opposite, which would be a cooler color that gives it more contrast. Something for example here. And at this point, it is simply a matter of adjusting and testing with different values for our lighting. We can, for example, turn off some of the lights to see how they work individually. For example, by rotating it, we can achieve a better result, because isolating it helps us to understand how they are working individually. I think these two in the background are pretty good, and this one, which is the main light, maybe we can scale it a little bit and reduce the intensity. Okay, the background I can make it a little bit more intense. I can also give this light a little bit of tonality. Something around here. And here we are getting a very interesting result. I think we are ready with these lights. Another detail that you can also adjust is here in the render parameters at the bottom, in color management, is to increase the contrast a little bit. By default, it is set to none, but I think it is advisable to set it to medium-high contrast, because the default rendering of Blender is a little pale, so when we increase here a little bit the contrast, it can improve a lot the result. You can play here with other options. For example, we can try high contrast, which I think is already a little bit exaggerated. By default, I like to use medium-high contrast, and you can also play with exposure if you consider it necessary. But well, here we would already have the render of this model, which is a fairly simple process. Then, if we are already satisfied with all the details, and we like the result as such, we can take our final render. Here, the last thing that remains to be configured is the quality. First, we have the sampling, which is the amount of passes that are executed for our render. The more we have, the better the final quality, but this is an extremely exaggerated number. Also, we are going to be using the denoise as well, so let's reduce this number. I would think that 30 samples would be enough. And to compensate, I'm going to increase the noise threshold a little bit. These are some values that I use frequently that in my opinion are quite balanced in terms of achieving a good quality in a short render time. 30 samples and 0.5 threshold. And now I'm going to come to this output tab where I have the resolution. The default is 1920 by 1080. You can change these values to have a different format, but I'm going to leave it at the default format. And before rendering, I'm going to move this front surface a little bit, because I feel that the background is getting a little bit dark. So I'm going to hit G, Shift Z, and move it to the front. And there you can see that it gets a little bit lighter and it's not so dark in the background. And to execute our render, we press F12. And that's it, guys. Here we have our first render. See that, as I said, we don't need so many samples for this type of models. With 30 samples and the threshold we used for the noise, it is more than enough. This render took 17 seconds, which is a very good time for the quality it is offering us. And finally, if we want to save the image, I'm going to hit Image, and here's the shortcut, Alt-S. I'm going to hit Alt-S and save it to my desktop. Then I come over here to the desktop, and here's my final image. Okay, so that's all you need to know to create presentation renders of your models. And with this, our rendering tutorial is finished. I hope you have learned a lot from this video, and if you want to learn Blender in depth, I invite you to check out my Blender course for beginners. You have the link in the description. I will also be uploading a lot more content to the channel, so I invite you to subscribe if you want to stay updated. I hope you have a lot of fun modeling, and see you in the next video.